We'll have a look at what we did last time, and given what we did last time, we can somehow extend on that. Remember that we studied the problem of path planning, and today we'll look into the question, okay, so once we're given a path, how could we actually plan a motion? Let's see, this is light difficulty 2. And once we are done with that, we'll summarize and are done for today. So, let's start. You remember, we have been studying the problem of problem solving. And our approach towards that problem of problem solving, was to consider tree search algorithms. We studied a lot of tree search algorithms more or less in detail, and looked at their runtime behaviors. We looked at the notion of uninformed tree search. We looked at the notion of randomized tree search, in particular Monte Carlo tree search techniques. And then last time, we looked into the notion of informed tree search. And in particular, we considered the problem of informed tree search by means of the example of the problem of path planning. That is a very important problem that occurs in many different situations and practical applications. And tree search algorithms are somehow sort of the canonical approach towards this problem of path planning, in particular informed tree searches. We looked into the A-star algorithm. Again, you remember that problem solving deals with well-defined problems. It's basically to say we have some sort of state space, some sort of successor function, initial states, goal states, path costs, and therefore it is obvious that this problem of path planning, if we cast it as the problem of finding a path in a graph, can be attacked using these tree search algorithms. Well, why would path planning be actually a problem worth studying in the context of computer game AI? And we did not really discuss that in detail, but it is an extremely important problem in many different modern computer games, modern genres. These non-player characters or game bots quite often have to be able to navigate game maps, game worlds, have to find their way from some source to some target location. And that is, in a sense, that if we want to compute non-player characters, it would implement programs that realize the non-player characters of certain cognitive abilities and providing them with the means of planning paths through our game world is certainly important. And our approach was to encode maps, game worlds, like say parts of game worlds, let's call it maps, to encode their topology and geometry using graphs. Here there is an example. We can think of this as a 2D representation of some, I don't know, dungeon, some fantasy game or whatever. Here is part of a map, some room, say, the black curves here denote walls, something we cannot see through, cannot walk through, but all these little gray dots are used or meant to represent locations on this map a player or a non-player character can actually assume. And the problem might be to reach this point from this point. So I don't know, for some reason the player, the non-player character, has to get from here to there. The question is how to do that. If we represent this map using this graph, then we talked about the idea that this problem of finding a way from the red dot to the green dot can be cast as the problem of determining an optimal path in this graph, where the red dot would denote the source node and the green dot would denote the target node. Now, there are two words on this slide I haven't used last time. Of course, you can recognize them because they are typeset in italics. It's the word topology and geometry. So If you're a mathematician, either here in class or watching this on the internet, now is a good time to take your half plates. Because now I explain what topology and geometry are. Very careful now. In a very rough sense, the idea of topology and geometry refers to the study of certain invariants of certain transformations of objects. In a very rough sense, and actually I will not make it more precise than that. On the contrary, I will make it less precise. We can think, and for us, it's not really important to dig down to the deepest level of the mathematical definitions of these areas. In a very rough sense, we can think of topology as the study of global structures of something. And we can think of geometry as the study of local structures of something. And even rougher, and if you really need to remember, then you could try to remember like that. Geometry is where things are located, and topology is why they are located there. And this becomes, clearer, I hope, by looking at these four examples. Let's say these four graphs were indeed representations of game maps. Well then, this one looks quite different from this one, doesn't it? But this is because of the geometry of these two graphs. Topologically, they are the same. They are identical. If we were to study them using methods of topology, we could not distinguish those. Why is that? Consider, for instance, the fact that to get from here to there, you have to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 transitions in this graph. As it so happens, it's the same for this graph. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 13 transitions, and here and there. The details of these transitions are different. So if we think of these four graphs as being embedded in the two-dimensional Euclidean plane, then it is of course a difference if we want to transit from here to there, because we first have to go up and then to the left. It's sort of like the corresponding nodes in this graph go up, go up. So geometrically they are different, but topologically they are indeed indistinguishable. They are both line segments. And it does not even matter, like, seriously, from a very abstract point of geometry, topology, it does not even matter how many nodes there are. Basically, this is a line from here to there. It's sort of looped, like the way I have embedded them in the geometric space of the two-dimensional points. There is a loop, but it's basically a line segment from here to here. And the same goes for that. The other two graphs are slightly different, but geometrically we would say that this one and this one are very similar. This one looks very much like this one. If we were to superimpose the two, like overlay the one on top of the other, they would be almost perfectly congruent. There's some difference with this node here, but geometrically they are almost identical. And the same holds for this one and this one. Geometrically, they are almost identical. But topologically, this one is very different from this one. For instance, to go from this node to this node, we don't need 30 steps anymore. So the global structure of this graph is very much different from the global structure of this graph. And with respect to global structures, these two graphs here are again identical. And so we will come back to this difference between topology and geometry later on. Let us define the notion of a waypoint graph. let's think of these things as waypoint graphs, which, as the name suggests, we use to model topology and geometry of game worlds, game maps, where the term waypoint is used to refer to locations in the 2D or 3-dimensional video game world a player or a computer-controlled player can be at. So let us say that a waypoint graph is a directed labeled graph. So we have a tuple G that consists of elements VE, LV, and LE that encodes topology and geometry of game maps. And now that we have had a very coarse and rough look at the notions of topology and geometry, we can carefully deduce that the topology of the map is encoded using the vertices and the edges, whereas the geometry of this game world or game map is indeed represented using the labeling functions. So for instance, we could think of the vertices indeed representing possible waypoints, and the edges of a waypoint graph could indicate possible transitions between waypoints. And the vertex labeling function would, for instance, map every vertex to a 2-dimensional or 3-dimensional coordinate. So this is where the geometry happens. And the edge labeling function could, for instance, be used to map every edge to a distance value, where if we were to use this, this edge label could indicate the distance between the two endpoints of the corresponding edge, the geometric distance. So the graph structure encodes topology of the map, and the labeling functions encode the geometry of the map. Why does it make sense to choose this graph to be directed? Let's go back to this. So again, like in other words, topology is encoded in the vertices and edges. They denote places and possible transitions, and the two labeling functions denote, say, Euclidean locations and distances. Now, why do we need directed graphs? Any idea? Let's consider this. This is a screenshot of a game map in Game Crate 2. And here these green dots indicate waypoints. Actually, in this example, the waypoints were gathered by first recording lots of games human players played on this map, and using some clustering algorithm to cluster their trajectories, that is the motions they carried out on this map, into discrete representative states, and we call them waypoints here. And the green edges were drawn whenever a transition between one state and the other was observed. And here's this interesting edge right here. So in all the games that were recorded and provided us with the database of computing these waypoints here, there was a transition from here to there. The player did jump down this, cliff, ledge here. It is impossible, given the physics of this game, it's not totally impossible, but usually impossible, to transit from here to here. This is an example why it makes sense to consider waypoint graphs as directed graphs. It is perfectly possible to transit from here to here or from here to there. From here to there, so this is an undirected edge. We can traverse it in both directions. But this, it's not visible in this plot, but it's obvious from the game physics. This is a directed edge. We can go from here to here, jump down, but not go back up. So when we represent game worlds, game maps in terms of graphs, in terms of waypoint graphs, they usually are directed graphs. And here is the notion of a graph geodesic. This is just a fancy term, the topologically shortest path between a source and a target vertex. This is again the difference between topology and geometry. If this was the source node and that the target node, then the geometric geodesics, the shortest distance between these 2 points, if we assume that these graphs are embedded in a two-dimensional plane, then of course the shortest path from S to T geometrically is as the crow flies, a straight line. But it may not be possible, I don't know, given the architecture of a game map, to actually follow this geometrically shortest path. Instead, we might have to follow the given waypoints, and therefore, topologically, the shortest path from S to T, well, consists of a sequence of line segments, which of course, last time we said it's a sequence of nodes, but these two things are identical. So topologically, this would be the shortest path. This is the geodesic from here to there in this graph. And here, once again, in just one single picture, you have the difference between topology and geometry. Then, we looked into Dijkstra's algorithm as a possible approach towards the problem of path planning. Indeed, we saw that it was conceived as an approach towards the problem of computing the distances in graphs rather than a path, but we abused it slightly to compute shortest path. And let us briefly remember what it does. So we are given a graph, we are given a source node. And then this algorithm initializes a dictionary. Let's use this term, dictionary. That's what we use on our endeavors in Python. And I am indicating these dictionaries with this square brackets, right? So it initializes this dictionary for every vertex in the graph to a value of positive infinity. And for the source node, this distance is set to 0. So the distance from the source node to itself is supposed to be 0. And in the Dijkstra algorithm, the fringe set is initially set to all the vertices, to the set of vertices of the graph, and the closed set is supposed to be the empty set. And then it basically iterates this while loop. While the fringe is not empty, a node is selected from the fringe. And this is done in an informed manner. This is different from what we have done previously. The node that is selected for further consideration, for expansion, is supposed to be that node in the fringe for which we previously have computed the smallest distance value. And of course, once we begin with the Dijkstra algorithm, that node will be the source node, because that has a distance value of 0, or the other nodes have a distance value of infinity. Right? At the beginning, it's obvious what node that is. We remove this node from the fringe, add it to the closed list, and examine all neighbors of the correctly selected node, unless they are in the closed set. All the neighbors that are not closed yet will be examined, and we simply see if their previous distance value exceeds the distance assigned to the node u, which we have selected for expansion, plus the distance from u to the selected node v. If this distance that was previously assigned to a neighbor v of u, if this distance exceeds this term, then we update the distance of that neighbor v accordingly. And you may also set this dictionary of predecessors accordingly in order to compute path. So that is Dijkstra's algorithm. It's certainly one of the most beautiful algorithms in all of computer science. Very important breakthrough in a sense. But this one, again, is more an approach towards computing distance values, values of geodesic distances between the source node S and any other node V in G. It's not so much tailored towards the problem of finding the optimal path from S to a certain target node. And therefore, we also look into the idea of the A star algorithm, which is a variant of Dijkstra's algorithm. It looks sort of much different, but then again, it's just sort of a clever variant. Here, we initialize two dictionaries. This is slightly different than in Dijkstra's algorithm. And what was called D in Dijkstra's algorithm is now called G, and that is again just for historical reasons. But this dictionary G contains distance values. So we initialize that one to 0 for the source node, and we initialize another dictionary F, this is a heuristic function, for the source node to be the distance assigned to the source node, G of S, plus some function H of S, the source node, and the target node T we want to reach. In this algorithm, we initialize the fringe to be the set containing just the source node, and as always, initialize the closed set to the empty set. And then again, while the fringe is not empty, we select a node from the fringe, again in an informed manner. This time we do not look at this dictionary G, but at this dictionary F, and we select that node from the fringe that has the smallest F value. And of course, at the very first iteration, it is obvious which node that is, because it has to be the source node. There is no other node in that dictionary here. We remove the selected node from the fringe and add it to the closed set. We again examine all the neighbors of the node we just selected, if they are not in the closed set. And then we basically carry out the same update as we did with Dijkstra. And again, the difference is that for this dictionary F, we do not merely update these two distance values, but again, this heuristic function H comes into play. So in this function, F discrete functional dictionary, as you like, F, we keep track of distances traveled so far to reach sort of the predecessor of F, plus a value to reach this node V, plus a value that estimates how long or how far is it from where we are right now to the target. Therefore, if we in the next iteration select the node from the fringe with the smallest F value, we now select a node according to a criterion that combines information about the path we have traveled so far to reach that node, plus some fuzzy information as to how much it may take, how much longer it may be. Once this thing has terminated, because here this dictionary of predecessors is definitely carried around, this yields the shortest path, or geodesic, from the source node to the target node. Definitely, we can prove that if this heuristic H is admissible. And let us look at how A star comes up with a path from node 37 to node 43. And we start with the situation where at the very initial call of this A star, or iteration of the A star algorithm, the fringe consisted of node 33. Topologically, this node has 4 neighbors. We examined them. We already assigned these F values to these 4 neighbors and put node 37 in the closed list. So if it's red, then it has been examined. If it's green, it's a node on the fringe, a node we may examine further. So again, our problem is to get from here to here. How will that happen? How can we go there? is there a difference between geometry and topology in this example?
Yes.
Yes.
The shortest path. Yeah, if there was an edge between 40 and 42, will be straight, right?
We cannot reach 43 as the Prof lies.
Yeah.
This is what the graph structure tells us. So, with respect to geometry, the shortest path would just be that line. That's not possible for us to use. So, it has to be a path, say, somewhat around there. We cannot also go like the lower part is this, a gap here. So, but what kind of nodes will the A-star algorithm consider further in this situation? Any idea? It will, yeah, you suggest 38, let's see. Indeed.
Well, just a few steps then to understand that.
Yeah, but this is what I'm trying to hit home here. The algorithm, of course, does not know that there is a gap here.
Yeah.
The G value for these, let me go back one slide. The G value for these 4 neighbors of the source node is the same. They are all one step away, or like if we assign a distance of 1 to these edges, they're all at the same distance from the source node. But the heuristic I am using here, and that is this geometric distance between the node we are examining, one of these 4, and the target node. So we have geometric distances like that. That is, of course, smallest for node 38. And therefore, this f value that is the sum of the distance traveled in the graph plus the expectation as to how much it will take to reach the target will be smallest for node 38. Let's see, it expands node 38, node 39 appears on the fringe, it will be expanded, and then something interesting happens. How could it be that in this situation 49 and 31 are not being examined further, but rather the next node that is expanded is 46?
Distance now is bigger than
Exactly. The G value for 46 is so much smaller than the G value for 49 or 31 that even though the H value for these 2 nodes is much smaller, the sum of the G value of this node and the distance to the target, the geometric distance, is smaller than the G value for this node and its distance to the target. So here we see that this A star, in a sense, flips back and forth. But what is this pure algorithm to do? It is an informed search algorithm, because it always considers that fringe node for further expansion that has the smallest f value. But here it so happens that after we reach this situation, now the smallest f value was found here. Let us continue this. And see, now this one has been expanded, and now in the next step, sort of randomly, it's 49 because it doesn't make a difference whether it's this one. This one has to pick one of them. But now apparently the sum of the G value for this node and its H value is larger than the sum of the G value for this node and its H value. That can happen. And now we continue the exploration. This looks good. But this is, of course, again, a downer. Now we've already sort of found node 67 as something that is really close to where we want to get. And then in the next step, for a freakish reason, it expands node 54, which is again rather far away from where we actually want to go. But this is again because these nodes are selected according to the distance traveled on the graph to reach them, plus the expected distance to the target. And so for this node, the distance traveled on the graph somehow dominates the f value, so that it is indeed this node that has a smaller f value. And this will happen a couple of times. If you look at it, now we continue there, and then we continue there, and there, and there, and then we are. So this jumping back and forth is indeed very characteristic for this A star argument. But there is nothing this poor graph search argument can do. To us it is not. We see that. Right? You are sitting sort of far away. You see the general layout, the topology of this graph. You know you should go from here to there. You have a question?
No, I'm just commenting because we see that because we have knowledge about the whole environment, and the algorithm is kind of blind.
Yeah.
It's just trying. And if there was a direct edge from one of the lately explored edges, he will find the shortest path. That's why.
Yeah, sure. No, these algorithms are they perform an informed search.
Yeah.
So they have a criterion to select a node from the fringe for further examination and expansion. And this criterion, according to this criterion, whatever node they select is indeed the best one for the current situation they're in. But still, this A star argument lacks sort of our global overview. For us as human observers, it's obvious, well, you better go from here over there to there. The algorithm has to uncover that in a rather cumbersome manner. However, we did not really go through the proof last time, but we saw that we can prove it, that if this heuristic H is admissible, this algorithm will find the optimal path. And again, nodes for expansion are selected according to this heuristic F, which combines information as to the length of the path traveled to reach that node, plus an estimate of the future path cost. Now, how can we choose this heuristic function, this estimation function H? First of all, if we do not choose it at all, but set it to some constant value, for instance 0, but it can be any other constant. But if we set it to 0, then it's obvious then A star is Dijkstra. Because then the selection of the node to be expanded further is purely based on the cost of the path traveled so far. And that is what Dijkstra is. And if H is an admissible heuristic, that is, if it is a function that underestimates the future path costs, then we can prove that A star will produce the optimal solution, will definitely do it. And in the example we just went through, we already saw that for an admissible heuristic, a heuristic that underestimates the future path cost, it may happen that this function f is biased towards this first term g. Right? The algorithm has uncovered nodes very close to the target already from our point of view, but then began to examine nodes that were further away. And that can only happen because these nodes have a much smaller g value than the nodes closer to the target. So, therefore, and we saw that in the example, the algorithm favors, on average, nodes that are farther away from the target node than we would consider sort of logical for next expansion. That can happen. It has uncovered a couple of nodes very close to where they actually want to get, but then begins to study nodes farther away. Yeah?
If we improve the heuristic function, wouldn't it be better, let's say, if we just eager, if we know that we are closer, then just kind of give a different weight to that node?
Yeah. This question is, couldn't we just choose a better heuristic function?
Yes.
And yes, we can. We have to be careful. So one answer I can give you is the following. So far we confine ourselves to admissible heuristics. If we choose an inadmissible heuristic, that is a function that overestimates future path costs, this function f of n may on average be biased to this term. And so therefore it may favor nodes that are closer to the target for further expansion than are closer to the source node. However, if H is inadmissible, we do not have a guarantee anymore that A star is optimal. So what can happen is that, it can happen that A star will find a solution rather quickly because H is sort of dominating this expression here. But that solution might be longer than the optimal solution, shortest possible. Typically that does not happen. On the contrary, so if we choose an inadmissible heuristic, it is either very fast or extremely slow. And there's nothing we can do about it. So if we luck out and choose some H that is not admissible, if we are lucky, that actually buys us something, but typically this is thin ice, and you shouldn't step on it. This is dangerous. However, we can say more about these heuristic functions. We can prove, and I'm just sketching this here, that let us assume there were two admissible heuristics. Let us call them Hi and Hj, so two different functions that estimate the future path cost. We say that Hi dominates Hj if it gives a larger or equal value for any vertex n. If Hi gives a larger or equal value for any vertex n in the graph than Hj, then we say Hi dominates Hj. Now we can then prove that for these two heuristics, H star, if we run it with the dominating heuristic Hi, will expand fewer nodes on average than H star with the heuristic, A star with the heuristic Hj. And here is a sketch, so we have to be very careful here, where we know that the heuristic function is given as this component G of the node we are considering plus the heuristic, say, Hi of the node we are considering. And if f star denotes the heuristic function value for the optimal solution, then we know that for a node on the path to the optimal solution, the heuristic at this node on that path will still be smaller than for our target. We can sort of rearrange this equation, subtract G on both sides, and we find that H of I is less than f star minus G of n. Now this G is the same for both heuristics. We know that this one is larger than Hj, so there would be greater than Hj here. And that is basically to say that if we would keep track of the nodes put in the fringe using heuristic Hi and keep track of the nodes put in the fringe using heuristic Hj, the set of nodes produced in the fringe by Hj is larger. There are more nodes in there on average. Or in other words, Hi somehow produces just a subset of the nodes expanded by Hj. This is again because this one can be put here, and you see that this is in a sense just a subset. And I am calling this a sketch of the proof because in order to be rigorous here, we would have to consider path of the same length and whatever and whatnot. And in this proof, the term average does not even appear. In this sketch, the term average does not even appear. But just from looking at this equation, we can I guess, I hope, see that the number of nodes produced by this heuristic is just a subset of the number of fringe nodes produced by the other. This one, like making that one precise, would actually require a bit of work. I'm not going to do that. But this sketch points into the direction of how we can prove that. Now, if we assume this had been proven, and not just sketch, then of course we can now deduce the following. If we have a couple of admissible heuristics, say k different ones, then we should probably choose the one that dominates all the others, because that one would expand the fewest, the smallest number of nodes on average. So this is the best answer I can give to your question as to how to choose this heuristic H. This is an art. This has nothing to do with science. We have scientific knowledge about like what's going on, but you know, there's no really constructive algorithms that will tell you how to produce such a heuristic. Given some problem, what can you do to come up with a very good heuristic? Basically requires your intuition and stuff. Unfortunate. In the application area of path planning, it's always the Euclidean distance. Basically always. I have to probably be more careful with these claims, but for path planning, the heuristic is always the careful, always the Euclidean distance. Okay, let's wrap this up. So far, we have looked at the problem of computing an optimal path from the point of view of computing the shortest path. But in video games, the optimal path for a non-player character to choose from one point, source point, to some target point, can be optimal even if it is not the shortest path. For instance, it might be a good idea to produce a path that appears most human-like and not so ragged or as these paths on the grid we have seen so far, probably a bit smoother. It might also be a good idea to compute paths that are least dangerous. You know, if one player character might come under attack by traveling the shortest path from A to B, it's probably not a good idea to take this path. But if there's a longer path that is much safer in the sense that there is no trap waiting along that path, then you should take that longer path. Could also be that it is better to follow a path where the risk of being detected is smaller than for, say, the shortest path. So there are different criteria for what it is that defines an optimal path. Well, given what we have done so far, an obvious solution to address this issue would be to choose the edge weights in the graph correspondingly. If we were able to use weights that would encode the stealthiness or sneakiness of a transition from one waypoint to another, then we can come up with paths that somehow optimize criteria like these. We may have to update our notion of f, in particular of this heuristic h. So these things may or must be tuned corresponding. That can be done. Can be done. I am ignoring that because there are other opportunities or other ways of how to do that. And to get an idea as to what else can be done, let us first study the problem of moving in a game world. So we have this silly map again. There is some structure on the map which we cannot penetrate, indicated by these black wall-like things here. This map is basically a grid graph, almost a perfect lattice. These distortions here, but this is a two-dimensional grid with a couple of nodes removed, and the problem would be to move from here to there. And we now know how to plan path from here to there, and if we run the A star algorithm, it produces this path. And you know, that is certainly the shortest path with respect to the graph topology. So this is the graph geodesic in this example between here and there. In this example, we have different source and target nodes, so we have a different shortest path. And they are certainly the shortest path, and it's optimal. A star and star them are nothing to argue about, but they really look strange. As a human player, this is not how we would walk from here to there, most likely not. So most likely, for instance, in this example, we would probably run with our human-controlled game character from here to there, and then from here to there, and there, and there. So definitely not like these Manhattan block-like path with right angles, and this is not really intuitive. And indeed it is not. And that is, there is still a difference between the waypoint graphs we use to characterize or represent game maps in an abstract manner and the true local geometry of the game map. For all intents and purposes, modern game worlds are continuous 2- or 3-dimensional worlds. There are obstacles, but moving from here to there is not just, you know, discrete movements, but it's indeed continuous movements. So these waypoints are mere auxiliary tools or means for modeling, and we may use them to, you know, represent the global properties of maps or game worlds. But if we want to move from one waypoint to the other, the game character can actually do that in a rather smooth and continuous manner. And here is a function that will realize that. Let us assume that this vector x denotes the current location of the game character we want to control using a program. And t is a target location, probably the next waypoint along a path of waypoint from some sort of some target. Now t is just sort of the next target. Well, we can check if the distance between where the character NPC is at right now and the target it wants to reach exceeds some threshold. Should that be the case, well, then we can compute a displacement vector, let's call it delta x, which is basically the vector t minus where we are right now, so it's a vector pointing from here to there. And we can normalize that so that it becomes a unit vector, a vector of length 1. Then we might scale that vector again with some speed factor. So this gives us a displacement, and we basically return x plus delta x. And have moved the character, say, from here to there, and then we call this function again, move the character from here to there until we sort of are close enough to the target, and then a new regime takes over. So this is, for instance, how you could use these move to target functions in order to actually walk along the path. So say we are given the graph G, and we have the path, which is a sequence of vertices, starting from the vertex we call the source node, and ending in the vertex we call the target node. So what we would do here is we would pop the first vertex, say, of this path, if we represent it as a step, then we can pop it, and consider the current location of the non-player character as the label, like the vertex label of the corresponding node. Remember, the waypoint graph is a label graph. So we pop the vertex and extract its label, which is a 2D or 3-dimensional location. And then, while this path still contains nodes, we pop the next one and call it t. This is the current target vector. And set some flag arrived to false. And then, while we have not arrived, We call this move to target function, which is basically what we discussed on the previous slide. And once this epsilon is not exceeded anymore, it will actually return true. So here we could determine if we have arrived at the current local target. If this thing has terminated, we pop the next node out of our path we have planned using A star and move from where we are right now to the next node. So this is how non-player characters move through a modern game world. And these paths, these naively computed paths on a grid or even on other kinds of graphs, does not have to be a grid graph, right? Can be any, say, Voronoi tessellation of the game world, whatever. But still, if we were to move from one vertex in a path to the next, then these things might look ranked. So one idea could be to, well, thin out these paths, that is, remove certain nodes from these paths, because using this idea we can move freely between one node and the other. So we don't have to move from any node to any other node in this path. Any subsequent, we can get rid of some of the nodes. Here is one idea as to how you can do this. Here I am initializing a new path. So again, we're given the graph and a path that has been computed. And I am initializing a new path. So this thing is called new path as a stack. And that stack is initialized so as to contain the first two elements of the path we have computed. This is the initialization of this stack new path. And then we have a while loop, basically, again, while the path we have computed is not empty. I'll go over here. So we iterate over the path with this while loop, and while this is not empty, we do something. And what we do is, so we have initialized the new path with this node and this one. These are the two vertices in the path that is being passed to this thin out function. And now we are examining this node. And what I have colored in red here is top 2. So if we have a stack and we compute the top, or like the top element of the stack, then that is the top element of the stack. Here I'm interested in the second element of the stack. So this one is the initial element of new path, and that one is pushed on top of it. So this one is the second element of the initial new path. Now we are examining this node. We are in this while loop here. We examine this node, and we check if this top 2, like the second element in this new path, is visible from here. Oh, that is the case. There is nothing that would block our view. If that is the case, we remove this node from new path and push this node onto new path. And we go to this one. This one is still visible, so this one will be popped and this one will be pushed and so on and so forth. Eventually we reach this node. Here something may happen from here. I don't know if this is still visible, we'll see in a second. But basically, once we reach a situation where the previous but one node is not visible anymore, we do not remove the previous node from the path. We just push the one we are currently considering. So this is basically lots of visibility tests. And how you do that, that depends on the game mechanics. You can use, say, if the game world was represented in terms of 2D or 3D polygons, then you can, of course, use intersections between lines and polygons. Here what I did is, this is a grid graph. I indeed just computed lines on these grids using the Blazin line algorithm. And whenever one of these lines were actually intersecting with one of the nodes that are being knocked out here, I called that not visible anymore. And using this, I got this. So obviously I didn't know anymore what happened, but after thinning out this rather lengthy path, using this approach with this visibility test that basically computing lines on regular lattices, we find a considerably hinged path consisting of the source node, this node, that one, and that one. And that looks at least more intuitive to human players. And therefore there is no reason why a non-player character should not also follow more intuitive path. And here are the examples. So this indeed works beautifully, and even for Python it is no problem at all. That can be done extremely efficiently. And then on this path, consisting of this, and this node, I carry out this move function we discussed earlier. And every black node indicates the speed was set to a constant, indicates a location, the non-player character indicated by the black dot, assumed while walking from here to there. So you have it. Depending on what you do with this variable speed, you can accelerate or decelerate, whatever. It's just geometry. But there you have it. It's a beautiful sequence of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever steps to go from here to there. Combining A star path planning, thinning out of path, and then this motion function. Alright, and here we already see that some of these black dots are rather close to this obstacle. And that will necessarily happen if we do it naively, because if we, I don't know, however, have this representation of the game world and then some nodes are being blocked out so that they form obstacles or whatever, shortest path from here to something behind that obstacle will always be somehow very close to the edges of these obstacles. That may not be desirable, because that might lead to game characters always moving along walls. Sometimes we don't want that. What can we do about this? So there are numerous solutions, literally, and we could, for instance, remove waypoints that are very close to obstacles. Why not? Can be done. Somebody has to do it either manually, or we have to write implement an algorithm that does that for us. It can be done, no problem. We can think about smarter ways of creating these movements between one node in the path to the other node in the path. And this is what we are going to do. In particular, we'll use physics to do that. Okay, let's see. To do so, we first have to familiarize ourselves with the notion of a potential. A potential is a function, and I am using the Greek letter capital phi here, so this is a Greek capital phi, that maps from some vector space, and I am considering the d-dimensional vector space over the reals into the reals. And these functions in physics are used to indicate the capacity for doing work. And here is an example. This is the electric potential in some point x that is due to a charge q located at some location xq. And studying physics, it turns out that this electrical potential is actually given by 1 over 4 times pi times epsilon naught times, and now q, the charge located in xq, over the distance between x and xq. So this is the definition of the electrical potential. Electric potential, you are some charge, electron or positron, I don't know, located in x. And just because there is some other charge, electron or positron located in xq, you can do work. And the amount of work you can do is indicated by this function. And I don't want to carry around this factor in front of it, and I don't care about this q at this point in time. So I collect everything that does not have to do anything with these x's here in a constant which I call c, which has nothing to do with the speed of light. Probably should have called it gamma, I don't know. It's a constant. It, you know, contains these things and this one. Now this is called C. And we have this 1 over the norm of the 1 over the distance between x and x cubed. We of course know that the norm of the vector x minus x cubed is just another vector. The norm of the vector is the inner product of this vector with itself. And we also have to take the square root. And in this case, we have to divide 1 by the square root, so it's actually the inner product. This expression, like 1 over this here, is the inner product of x minus x cubed times x minus x cubed. It's the product of itself. We have to take the square root and compute 1 over, so it's actually raised to the power of minus 1 over 2. Right. That is clear now. Now that we have seen an example of a potential, we can think about potential or force fields. These are gradients of potential functions. That is, force fields are functions that map from some d-dimensional vector space to some d-dimensional vector space. And they indicate directions and magnitudes of forces. Here is the example of the electric field due to a charge q at x cubed. It is basically the negative gradient of the potential we just discussed. And another way of writing this gradient is to say that we have to derive this function with respect to the vector x. Now, we already discussed that this function can be expressed as some constant times this negative square root, that's 1 over the square root of a scalar product. And so we see that the term following this constant c here is a function. So this larger parenthesis raised to the power of minus 1 over 2 is a function, let's call it f, of something, this is basically the inner product here, of x. So this capital phi is basically c times f of g of x. And therefore, if we want to compute the derivative of phi with respect to x, we basically have to derive f with respect to g, and then g with respect to x. This is not really difficult, because, well, if we derive f with respect to g, we basically have factor of minus 1 power in front of it. We have to subtract 1 from 1 over 2, minus 1 over 2, that gives us minus 3 over 2. This is the outer derivative here, and this is indeed the inner derivative. This is the derivative of a simple scalar product, basically 2 times the vector we are interested in. Alright, there you have it. This is the electric field. We can write this in a slightly different form. Now I'm basically reversing these substitutions I made. That is to say, instead of writing it like this, I will write it in terms of norms and vectors again. And we find that this thing raised to the power of minus 3 over 2 can actually be expressed as 1 over the squared distance between x and the location of the charge, times the vector, this is the term at the end there, times the vector normalized by its size. So this is actually a unit vector pointing from x to x cubed. And then the electric force, once we have the force field, is basically the force due to a charge located at charge lowercase q located at some x cube is capital Q. This is a charge, if there is a charge in x now, like you are an electron or a positron, you are now located in x and you carry a charge of capital Q, then the force you are experiencing is Q times the electric field. So now I have x substituted everything for C. We don't really need that. But we see it's Q times Q over the squared norm of x minus x cubed times this unit vector. And therefore we see that if the two charges are of opposite signs, so one is negatively charged and one is positively charged, if the one is negatively charged, then we have to multiply all of this with some -1 sort of, and that gives us a force pointing towards x cubed. And therefore the two charges would have the tendency to be attracted. And if they are of the same charge, then this is a repellent force, points away from x cubed. If we have several charges, say n of them, we can nevertheless compute the overall force on some charge located in x. We just have to resort to the principle of superposition. And that's basically to say we have to sum the contributions, fields created by all the charges, lowercase q1 up to lowercase qn. Now, why am I doing all of this? Here is the answer. This is the situation we were dealing with. We have a game world. There are some obstacles. We want to move from one location in this game world to some other location in the game world that somehow is behind these obstacles from our point of view. What I have done here is I have put charges on top of sort of every node that would represent a part of this wall. And if we plot the potential field, well, it looks like this. I know you can hardly see it. I actually plotted the lower node field already. This drops off fairly quickly. We can also, this is the field, capital Phi, and that this is the potential, and this is the field. So now here you see many arrows pointing away from these charges I have put onto this map. And basically I thought that the is represented by, say, a negative particle. So therefore these things are somehow repellent. When I was computing these fields, I used corresponding minus signs, assuming that the game character is negatively charged, and therefore these force field lines point away from the walls. And at the same time, I don't know why I did it, I don't have to do it, but I thought it's funny, I put a positive charge in our target location, and this is why we see this warp here. So there's like lots of tiny arrows pointing away from these wall structures, and lots of sort of arrows pointing towards this target location. But now I have, to make a long story short, superimposed a force field over our game. Yeah?
Does every node, other than the node in the wall, also has charge?
No. He has asked if any other node, or every node, other than the wall nodes, does carry a charge. Not in this example. Not in this example. I come back to that in a second. If we use these ideas of force fields, we can adapt ever so slightly our code for motion generation, and that basically boils down to that we have somehow to adapt this computation of this offset vector, this delta vector, delta x. And all I do is I, compute it as we did before when we created that, but this time I am adding a contribution due to the force field that is now superimposed on the map. And so the update delta x of the current location becomes different, and here we see the effect. The shortest path is still from here to there, to there, to there. But now the movement of the character is actually like so. Rather than not. And that is because the walls are now repellent. Even though the character, without this term here, would try to move from here to here directly, there is something that pushes it away from the walls. And so the path becomes smoother. Now back to your question. we can use these force fields. For instance, if at this location there would be something very desirable, I don't know, a health pack or a sword or whatever your game character could pick up while walking from A to B, can be very difficult to include all these things in the path map. Of course, like items you want to pick up on a map have a waypoint node attached to them, or they are attached to a waypoint node. So you can actually plan the path from, okay, I am here and I need, I don't know, some health package right now, so I need to go there, whatever. But if you say I am at some point A and I want to go to some point B, and maybe I should pick up everything in between, then the planning problem becomes a bit daunting. But we could, for instance, if there was something located here, put an attractive charge on that location and plan a way from here to there. And if there was an attractive charge, the player would probably go like this. Right? Something that would attract it to here. Once it has been collected, we would have to switch off that charge. But all of these things can be done. All of these things can be done. So indeed, these force fields can be used to, in a sense, sneak in intelligent behaviors. Yeah.
It is only attaching a charge for the point enough, because this probably will make the path go near it, but it doesn't really ensure that it will go.
But this is why we have this thing here. This epsilon. But this like the question: if you have reached a location, in a sense, continuous space on these, this is. We always have to test if we are close enough to something.
No, I mean, if the head fact, for example, is not on the path, but you have an attractive charge to it.
Yeah, yeah.
So this will not ensure that the path will go through it, will just go near it. So, like
Oh.
for example, with the case of the wall, we just go away from it.
Yeah, that is a repellent charge. But if it was an attractive charge and it would make it strong enough, right? There is another parameter here. If we choose this very small, then the effect of these force fields is rather negligible. If we choose this very large, then this thing can actually go like so. So we can play with that. If we put an attractive charge here and make its influence really, really strong so that thing would go there, and then we have to switch it off, because otherwise it would never leave that waypoint again, like in this computation. We have to switch it off and it will continue its path as planned. So by placing charges on strategically interesting points on the map and switching them on and off according to whatever state the game character is in, we can create interesting behavior. Alright. Yeah, we're almost done. I have to mention this. If you represent a game map in terms of waypoints, you usually need a lot of waypoints to capture all the intricate details of the topology, like where to go from where, like what kind of transitions between locations are possible and whatever and whatnot. And that quickly leads to very large waypoint paths. Can you see the red dots superimposed over this World of Warcraft, part of the World of Warcraft map? They are red. So there are red dots here. And there's supposed to be many, I really don't know. Practitioners in the industry found that to be not desirable to have so many waypoints. And so just a couple of years ago, again, it's somehow surprising, the idea was born to represent game maps, game worlds, in terms of these navigation meshes. And this is basically to say that what we see here is a collection of convex polygons, and each two adjacent polygons actually meet in an edge, not just in vertex but in an edge. And compared with the number of waypoints, lots of them, the number of meshes is rather small. So if you force these meshes to be convex polygons, and if you compute them such that indeed two adjacent polygons share an edge, then you know that it is always possible, this is sort of elementary geometry, to draw a line from center point of some polygon to the center point of the edge that so is at the boundary between them, and from there to the center of the other polygon. And therefore you can run A star, say, on the center points of these polygons, and then you can plan smoother motions using geometric algorithms. They are called funnel algorithms. So if you start here and you want to go somewhere, we basically know, okay, this is the center point of the polygon I'm at, this is the center point of the polygon I want to go to, there are center points of all these polygons. If I can transit from one to the other, there will be an edge. I run A star on this graph of center points of polygons. Now I have a path from here to there, and now I have to adapt my motion to the geometry of this world. So instead of going from this center point to the center point, I go from where I am to the center point of the intersection between this polygon and that one, and from here I go to and so on. Alright, you can do that. Right. And this is indeed very efficient and whatever. I am not at all discussing these things in detail. Indeed, you can look these up on the internet. Lots of blog posts that discuss that. That is how it is done these days. They use navigation meshes and plan paths with respect to center points of navigation meshes, and then compute motions with sort of respect to the intersection of the navigation meshes. I don't like that. And now we have reached a crucial point in our lecture. Because now it's time to venture into the unknown. Now it's time to think about if modern computer science could possibly contribute to what is done in the gaming industry. This is all about creating agents that behave intelligently, and whatever and whatnot. And up to now, we have studied stuff that has been developed a long time ago. We have studied stuff that is considered to be classical AI technology. And this works, and it works beautifully. It has very nice sort of runtime guarantees with respect to modern games. But I personally think, at least now it's 2014, and I think that for more than 10 years now, it is time to try to fathom if we cannot contribute learning techniques to this problem of game AI. And the issue with this difference between waypoint graphs and navigation meshes is, in my eyes, the perfect example of the fact that there is something going wrong in the communication between academia and industry here. I don't even know why you have to invent a new name for something where I'd say this is just a Bonn-Aachen tessellation of that. No, it is a navigation mesh. And here we see a problem. This is, from my point of view, nothing new. It took quite some time until it made its way into practice, and of course we all see that it really buys you performance because indeed you have fewer waypoints, and so your planning efforts reduce. I can totally see that, but this is just a Bonn-Aachen tessellation of this graph. And I really don't understand how you cannot see that. And that is, of course, because I am not working in industry, I'm working in university. So I'm used to thinking in these abstract concepts, and I'm never worried about how to implement these things. In industry, it's the other way around. They don't have the time and luxury to think about these abstract concepts. They have to think about how to implement these things so that it is fast, because the faster it is, the more the game can do in total, the execution of the game. But now we will sort of move into uncharted territory for now, for the remaining part of the lecture, and look at other approaches towards realizing seemingly artificial intelligence for game characters. For instance, I would argue in defense of waypoints. I can perfectly see the point that if you have a lot of waypoints, your computational burden for path planning is unacceptably high. No questions about that. But why not just cluster the waypoints? Why not just cluster the waypoints, and instead of planning path with respect to all the waypoints, we can then plan path with respect to the cluster centers we just found, say. And this is of course exactly the same what they are doing when they represent a map in terms of a navigation. They, in a sense, have clustered the waypoints and now represent each cluster in terms of a convex polygon. And of course, if we run, say, the A star algorithm on these clustered waypoints, then in a sense that is hierarchical A star. So we can think of having to plan a path from some part of a very large map to some other part. This is basically the problem of finding a path from one cluster center to the other. And then the details of that path can actually be run with the actual waypoints. But that is of course much cheaper if we do it in this hierarchical fashion. And we can do this. I don't see the problem. The problem might actually be that it is not at all clear how to cluster these waypoints. There is an additional advantage considering waypoints. We can probably learn them. And that is, we might actually, if we had a mechanism of recording what people are doing while playing a certain game, and record every of their activities, and if it is a game where you have to move through some world, we can record their movements. Let's call these trajectories. We can then extract waypoints and transitions between waypoints from recorded trajectories. And that has the tremendous benefit that the representation of the map we come up with by learning them from recorded data is very close to what people would do on that map anyway. And if our goal was to create believable game characters that behave as people do, then this is a way of how to approach that problem. Here is an example. Can you see this screenshot of Q3DM17? Do you see it?
Yes, partially.
Okay, so this is a top view on a part of the Quake 3 map. The map is called Q3 Deathmatch 17. And I've been running around on that map and recording my activities. And in particular, my spatial movements are represented in terms of red dots on the right-hand side. So the red dots you see on this graph on the right-hand side are indeed the locations I assumed while running around on this map. And there are a couple of black dots, actually 150, I guess, black dots, superimposed over the red dots. And they are just the result of running a clustering algorithm on these thousands and thousands of red dots. Well, and we see that they sort of cover the trajectories I chose while playing on that map. And indeed, since I transited from this red dot to this red dot to this red, we can actually also draw black lines between the black dots, because if there was a transition between a position I assumed while playing the game, and the position would belong to this black dot, like be closer to that black dot. And then I transit to another position, which would be clustered to another black dot. I can draw a line between these two cluster centers and say there was a transition between this waypoint cluster center and that waypoint cluster center. So, you know, we can automatically create graphs that would represent what a player, in this case I, did on this map. Here is another example. I don't know if you can see this. This is now an aerial view of the whole map, Q3DF17. So this is the whole game world for this level in grade 3. And we have an experienced player, you know, running around that map. The red dots over there are the trajectories of the player. You can see there's lots of flying through the air and flying back, and some places high up on this map and whatever. So we can actually, like, indeed recognize, at least experienced great players immediately recognize the geometry of the map just from looking at the spatial arrangement of these red dots. And again, we can cluster them, come up with a waypoint graph of this map automatically. You don't even have to have human designers create these waypoint graphs. We could do that automatically. If we have information like that, we can actually use that to run extended analysis with the waypoints we had. We then had 3 different players playing matches on this map, and they were indeed of different skill level, these 3 players, and we embedded their behavior into the representation of the map and created these heat maps. What we can see here, one of the 3 players was a camper who, you know, spent most of the time of that match on this platform here, where there is a sniper rifle, the railgun. From like this platform, you can, if you're good, control the map. So that was a camper. That guy spent most of the time there. Was not a very good player. This player is sort of a more experienced player, frequently running around and try to control the map from over here. And that is a representation of the behavior of a semi-professional. That guy was constantly on the move. Still, there are some preference locations, but you can already see that there's no preference locations. And that guy was constantly on the move and whatever and whatnot. So yeah, we can use the data we can record from it in the games to actually also learn about different playing styles and so on and so forth. Now, I said we somehow have to cluster these location data. Is that a big problem? I mean, how to cluster? Learn, it doesn't have to be learned, it can be there anyway, like could have been provided by a human game designer. How to cluster waypoints? Is there anything that can go wrong?
The obstacles.
Pardon?
The obstacles.
Obstacles, yeah.
If there's an obstacle and there's a way around it,
Yeah.
then the cluster, the obstacle would be the waypoint.
Exactly, exactly. This comes back to where we started today. This comes back to the difference between topology and geometry. Here we have a, just for the sake of the argument, very simple map. It's a dungeon, say. There is an exit, an entry and an exit. It's basically 4 rooms. It's, again, almost a perfect lattice. Our representation, the waypoint graph, is a perfect lattice. Well, then, you know, to plan a path from somewhere here to somewhere there, if we did that hierarchically, we could plan a path from this room to this room to that room to that room, and worry about the details once we have the global path. Right? So let's cluster the waypoints using k-means as everybody does in practice. Oh, we run into a problem. But I have these are 4 rooms, so why shouldn't I run k-means with k equals 4 here? Right? We want to find 4 clusters. If we do this, k-means happily does so, and we find one cluster here, which somehow captures what you said. There might be a problem with the obstacles. And indeed there is, because this algorithm k-means has found 4 clusters where, for instance, one of them comprises nodes in different rooms. To us, you know, that does not make sense. It's okay to somehow combine nodes in here with nodes in there because at least there is a transition, but these nodes here, they are definitely really not of the same nature as the nodes in this room here. Right? But k-means nevertheless says, oh, they belong together. And of course, they're like this node here is so much closer to that node than to this node down here. Why shouldn't that be the node in this cluster? I actually have discussions with practitioners and other game researchers who told me that, yeah, we tried k-means, it never works. True, but probably you could have known that in advance. But then again, k-means is very sensitive to how you start it. So here is another example. I did it a couple of times. This is another result. It is somewhat better, but still very bad. Better than bad. This is an inherent limitation of the k-means clustering algorithm. And this is not the fault of the algorithm. And that does not mean just because k-means doesn't work, machine learning does not work at all. And this is what we're going to try to discuss in the second half of our lecture series. And if that machine learning does have a lot to offer, but you really have to know what you are doing. Because there's hope. Right? This is the waypoint graph, and this is the result of using spectral clustering. It's another machine learning problem. It is not as well known as the k-means algorithm, and I don't know if it is part of the Descartes algorithm. But this is a standard technique in advanced machine learning, and as we see, it does a perfect job. It does a perfect job. Why is that? So where's the difference? Basically, coming back to what we discussed at the very beginning of today's lecture, k-means clustering considers geometry, and spectral clustering considers topology. And the next couple of times, we will study what I mean by that. We will look into that. And I'm trying to hit home the fact that, yes, machine learning has a lot to offer for game AI, but you have to know what you are doing. Let's see. So, today we have learned about waypoint graphs and the notion, and I am very careful, we did not really learn about the notion of geometry and topology, but we have discussed what geometry and topology could be and how we, in a sentence, can distinguish them. This is really deep stuff. We have to be careful. We saw that once we had planned the path from some source node to some target node in a waypoint graph, we can use the information in the path to actually create actual motions, actual movements of a non-player character, and we briefly discussed the use of potential fields to steer or control the motion behavior of non-player characters. That is what we did today. Are there any questions? Well, if not, then we see each other again next Monday, I guess. No, Thursday, sorry. Thursday. There's so many holidays. So Thursday it is.